Please consider supporting Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of black women and girls in Alberta. You can learn more about them at bwunited.ca. They are always looking for donations and volunteers. So please, again, support Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of black women and girls in Alberta. Again, that website is bwunited.ca.
My name is Frank Silvestri. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, not a Canadian. And Philly's really close to New Jersey, by the way. And I'm here to talk to you about why I am a Patreon supporter of Vish Khanna's Creative Control podcast, the unique long-form exploration of music, comedy, art, geography, and so much more. Vish is an incredible interviewer who has a charming, disarming, funny, reverently irreverent style, which feels a lot more like a conversation with friends than a podcast interview. These conversations have included talking to people like Jeff Tweedy, Nels Klein, Ira Kaplan, Dan Romano, Carson McCone, the White Hot Lung, Juliana Rialino, and one of my all-time favorites, the Sadies. So if you're like me and you find these kind of conversations vital, essential, and important, I hope you'll join me in supporting Creative Control on Patreon.
To make your flexible monthly donation to Creative Control, please visit patreon.com/creativecontrol.
Chris Corsano is a talented multi-instrumentalist who is particularly esteemed as a drummer and percussionist, and currently, but perhaps temporarily, calls Chicago, Illinois, home. Originally from New Jersey, Corsano has collaborated with countless musicians, appearing on at least 150 albums over the past 25 years, but his own solo discography is comparably smaller. His latest album is a powerful and reflective one, which finds him recording and playing and mixing all of the instruments you hear himself as he processed his late father's dementia and explored the human mind's parameters. The record is called The Key Became the Important Thing and Then Just Faded Away. It was released on June 28th, 2024 by Drag City Records, and it prompted Chris to return to this show to talk about things like life in Jersey and what we can learn about that state from a show like The Sopranos, dementia, psychedelia, and how a mind can be altered, imagination, illness, and art making. The now somewhat infamous episode that Chris was on with his band Rangda just prior to the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Our shared admiration for the double bassist William Parker. A relaxation trick. The projects we each have going with the great Mike Watt, other future plans, and much more. A part of the Lionsgate Sound Network with the support of listeners like you who follow and subscribe to this listener-supported and donor-driven podcast. Spread the word about it, leave nice reviews and ratings on your podcast platforms, and make flexible monthly donations at patreon.com/creativecontrol, which is the primary and most reliable way for podcasters just like me to make some kind of living, and where a monthly subscription of $6 American or its currency equivalent or more means you can access every single episode of this show in its entirety, which is not the case without that subscription. And that is the case for this particular episode. You'll hear just an excerpt of my talk with Chris, but if you want to hear the whole thing again, please consider subscribing at patreon.com/creativecontrol at that $6 American tier or the higher tiers. And there you go. You'll have access to every single episode, including this one. Plus in-kind support from independent businesses like Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, Ontario, and Granddad's Donuts in Hamilton, Ontario. This is episode 886 of Creative Control, featuring the lovely and talented Chris Corsano, with your host, me, Vish Khanna. Please enjoy this excerpt from our conversation, and to hear the whole thing, again, subscribe to the show at patreon.com/creativecontrol. before I go much further, congratulations on your wonderful new album. It's
Thanks.
fantastic. It's a bit of a mouthful to say. I've already said it. People will have heard me say it already, but it's the key, and then in parentheses, became the important thing. Wait, and then is there a different parentheses? Oh, then there's a square, whatever those are called, and then just faded away, and then another. Holy Lord, that's a typographical mouthful and eyeful now that I really look at it. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. What are those called? The square brackets? Is there a name?
Oh, brackets, I think.
Other brackets? There's two different kinds of brackets in the title.
To distinguish the first parenthetical phrase from the second.
Yes.
At least what I learned in Jersey in school, I don't know, maybe they're Jersey parentheses, I guess.
Okay, it's good that we delved into Jersey a little bit because it impacted your grammar, among other things, I guess. Is this to screw with the streaming companies? Because I can see this when you try to look for the album. I can see them blowing up. You're blowing a circuit every time you've tried to find this Chris Corsano album. Sorry. What does the title mean, actually? Can you explain it?
The titles of the album and also of the songs, they're from my dad. And he's no longer with us, but he was in the end stages of dementia. He lives a good long life, 91, but so we would, talk on the phone, and he always had a really great turn of phrase, kind of, he was just kind of a very poetic way of saying things, which I think actually he's from the Bronx, but the Italian-American Bronx, Jersey thing, which is why Sopranos is a great show. Some of the dialogue that's written, it's amazing. So it's not made up out of nowhere. So that part of the depiction is like, I related to that too, that people could be very funny while being very serious, and the way that you play with language. So he always had that up to the very end of his life, even when his cognitive thing was different than it had been for the first, 89 years of it. So they became, as I'm talking to him about what's going on in his version of what his days were like, he'd say some things, and I don't know, I was just talking to him, but also thinking, wow, these are amazing titles. And if you take them out of their context and put them in a different one, they become more psychedelic, or maybe parallel psychedelic, because I think what he was going through seemed like its own changing of reality.
Yeah, mind altering.
Yeah.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah. And so the key could be, it's always metaphorical. So there may be some more mundane, real world applications of what all those titles meant. But now they're kind of up for the listener to decide. So, and it was like my dad was giving me metaphors for understanding his experience of going through what he was going through, even if he was talking about his keys.
Oh, literally his keys.
Yeah, for that one was. But I was also trying to figure out, what do you do for a parent who you can't, it's, whatever you're trying to do, it's not going to work out, but so it was, and that, I Don't Have Missions was one, and there's some other ones he gave me, which, it was like really giving me not just the title, but also some way of understanding what he was going through, because I guess when you get into a state of dementia, you're kind of sailing a little bit away from the way the rest of the world sees the world. So,
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry for your loss, and I appreciate that explanation. I also, how was I to know? I'd like to apologize if I made light of the title.
No. I mean, I didn't. It was a thing that I didn't know if I would talk about or if I just keep to myself. But I like bringing him up. It feels good to talk about him, and so it's totally okay. It's great. Okay, it's nice for me to get to talk about my pop. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate your candor there, and I appreciate your understanding of where I'm coming from, and trying to make sense of these things on a superficial level, first of all, and then delving into it and discovering there's more to it. I mean, obviously, that's one of the reasons I like doing my show. So anyway, my point being, sorry to pry further, how fresh is the loss of your father? And I gather that the loss inspired this record, but I wonder what the exact correlation was temporally, if that makes sense.
Yep. The loss was 2023 in March. So the record was made in 2020, more or less. So, and then 2021 was really when he started, at least that his 3 kids were noticing.
I see. Okay.
That he was needing more help. So the creation of the record, that was more like, well, I'm not touring, I'm not doing anything, nobody's doing anything. Where I was living at the time, there was a basement. I could set up a bunch of stuff. But then because everything was sort of stuck in that frozen state of 2020, sent the recordings to Drag City. They were rough mixed, but not fully mixed. So then Drag City was like, yeah, we don't know when, we're waiting to see what happens with the world, but this can come out. And then it was back in my court, and I just took forever and ever to do the final mix. So in that space of time, and then with my dad's passing, just around that time was like a kind of a big, lots of things changing. And it was also when I was really finalizing the record. So it just seemed like, that those titles were all really fresh in my mind. And so that, it felt like connecting him to the record. Again, like another parallel of like his internal world. And then this was a record that is kind of some version of my internal world, since I'm multi-tracked rather than my usual thing of collaborating with people or whatever.
Yeah.
But that I was having a lot of different versions, and he would have a lot of different versions of himself. You talk to him one day, it's one thing. And then, so it seemed like, without knowing it, that this was all coming to a head together.
I wondered about that part of it, because as I listened to the album, it does feel fairly psychedelic and dynamic. And I wondered, I think you just spoke to it. So you're saying most of it was conceived of prior to your father showing symptoms and a diagnosis occurring. However, perhaps you were already on that wavelength. Is that how you're kind of looking at it?
Or that, like, it was such a big, in his life, big change. And then in my life, to see that, it seems like sometimes time flows in the opposite direction in terms of our perception, which is another psychedelic thing. So, maybe until it's about something, it's about everything and anything. And then through the process of the record taking so long for me to finish it, I think I was waiting for the thing to tie it all together. So the lens that I started looking at it through, it was also with some of the multi-track recordings, not about my dad at all, but it's about all the people I've played with, really, because I'm kind of copying moves from different guitarists I know, or, you always have influences, but it felt really great at a time when 2020, you can't be near anyone pretty much, that, the way that a dream might be calling up and rearranging and mutating all the things that you had happen during the day to help your deeper subconscious make sense of it. Maybe the record or records in general, you're doing that with your influences and the stuff that's inside you, and you're trying to spit something out that is about all of it or whatever, but how you make sense of a dream after the fact, So this is like my interpretation of this. If this record is a dream, then me saying things about my dad or the people I have collaborated with, that's my interpretation of it. I think everybody else should have a different, and I'm happy if people have different interpretations. I'm not trying to fix a meaning.
As we're speaking, and as I even ponder the artwork of the album, and the now, I guess for me, now poignant fact that you play everything on this record. You just said you were taking some inspiration from the people you've collaborated with. But I wonder if this is more of a meditation on the human mind and memory and consciousness and subconsciousness than maybe you realized at the time. I mentioned the artwork because I believe you also created the artwork. As I look at it, if I were really to stretch on it, it almost, I don't know what's going on in the background, but it made me think of like a CT scan or something, like an MRI or something, because there's something abstract and it's sorry, is that wild? Is that a wild notion?
No, I like that one.
Okay.
That's,
yeah.
I mean, I started painting a lot more during the pandemic, so that was also part of it. And yeah, the process that I paint by ends up being pretty abstract. And then it's this, I didn't know it was called, but like decalcomania, it gets called in art books. And so you put paint on one surface and you put that surface on a different surface and you pull it off. And so it's not brush strokes that any of those, that paint is. It's actually like the way that paint behaves when two surfaces that have paint on are pulled apart. You get this almost like vein-like or capillary-like structure.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that, the biological reference. And yeah, and then whether people, it's super abstract. So then it becomes like Rorschach-y and what people see, and you can either see really micro level or real macro level or whatever. So MRIs, yeah, I'm down for that. That sounds good.
Well, and I mean, when the specialists are trying to examine those scans, as far as I know, they're looking for abnormality. And they're looking for lack of a better term, discoloration. They're looking for cloudiness. And when I look at this image and I ponder some of sorry, this is going to get a little hokey, forgive me, but I feel like everything you've said is now hitting me, and I'm trying to think of where you might have been coming from as you delved into your own mind to come up with this on your own. Yeah, I'm just seeing that notion on the cover. Like I see that, and it's almost like an image in the background, and then there's color in the foreground to me. That's what I'm seeing. And if I listened to my parents and gone to medical school and become an image specialist, I'd be like, yeah, you got some stuff going on here. And this patient, something's wrong here. And we got to figure this out. So sorry if I'm being Dr. Columbo. I don't think he had a medical degree, but that's where my mind is going, is like, and also, I mean, did you invent an instrument on some level to perform some of this music?
I mean, I always am messing around with stringing stuff across a snare drum or whatever. So it's prepared.
It's a prepared instrument, I suppose.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, like it's a string stretched across the snare with a bridge. Or actually, it's a little soda bottle or soda can, but it acts like a violin bridge acts on a violin.
Yeah,
where it transfers the energy. So yeah, it's like, to call it invented seems like too big of a term, but yeah, like I was messing around with stuff. And that's always been part of what I really like doing, especially when you're like at home. What do you practice? And if it doesn't even feel like practice, it just feels like this is how I want to spend the day, of seeing what kind of sounds can I get out of these drums that I wasn't expecting to get.
Hey, thanks for listening to Creative Control, as always. As you may have heard me mention, I recently lost my day job, and I've had a few conversations with people since who've said, you had a day job? I thought your podcast was your day job. When I explained why it hasn't been my day job to a friend, he suggested I should share some of this information with people like you listening right now. So, in short, unless they have some giant exclusive $1 million contract, podcasters are not paid to make stuff by companies like Apple and Spotify. Podcasters do not make any money from streaming royalties. Ad revenue is dependent on a certain threshold of downloads each month, and even if your show is accessed 30,000 times a month, the income you get is actually really minimal. So podcasters like me usually make time in our lives to support our communities and our interests to make these shows, and our most reliable source of income for this work is in fact crowdfunding. In my case, it's my Patreon. So if you'd like to receive ad-free episodes earlier than everyone else, regular newsletters and blog posts, bonus audio content, and support my work, quite literally, please visit patreon.com/creativecontrol today. Thank you so much for listening to this excerpt from a recent episode of Creative Control with Vish Khanna. Every other Creative Control episode is only accessible to Patreon supporters. This is one of them. So please visit patreon.com/creativecontrol, become a subscriber today, and you won't miss a single episode in its entirety. There are links in the show notes to take you right there. So if you're able to, please do support this show and enjoy hours and hours of conversation. Thank you.